All right, let's dive deep into something that might seem a bit, well, dry at first glance.
Yeah.
But trust me, it's super important for anyone working with SAP systems. We're talking about network ports and firewalls specifically.
Yeah. Those gateways to your precious SAP data.
Exactly. And to help us on this journey, we've got a fantastic YouTube video as our guide. It's from the SAP Basis Wizard channel, and it's called SAP Ports and Firewall Explained.
Oh, that channel is great. And what's even better, SAP actually has this awesome interactive website.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it lists like every single port used by their applications.
That sounds incredibly helpful, like a one-stop shop for understanding SAP network security, right?
Exactly.
So what kind of information can we actually find on this website?
Well, you can see which application uses which port. The corresponding entries in the etc services file, default port numbers, the whole 9 yards, but there's more.
Okay, lay it on me.
It actually shows you the possible range of port numbers, how to calculate them based on the instance number, whether they need to be exposed externally, and even additional comments.
So it's like a decoder ring for SAP ports.
Absolutely.
So if I'm troubleshooting a connectivity issue, or maybe just want to understand which ports are involved in, a particular process, this website is my go-to.
Right, definitely. Like, say you're trying to find the HTTP port for a Java instance. You could filter the list by Java, locate the HTTP row, and then bam, you can see how the port number is calculated.
So it's a pretty amazing resource then.
Oh, absolutely. But there is one little quirk,
Oh.
the search box. It's not as functional as you might hope.
Oh, how so?
It only does a simple text search and doesn't actually filter the results, which can be a bit frustrating.
Okay, good to know. Good to know.
Oh.
Now, the expert in the video mentions that they've encountered more connectivity challenges with ABP-based systems. Is there any particular reason why those systems might be more prone to these issues?
It's tough to say for sure, but it could be because AB systems are, more widely deployed. Or maybe their architecture just leads to more complex configurations.
That makes sense. Regardless, it sounds like understanding how ABAP systems use ports is crucial, especially when you're dealing with load balancing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So can you explain, just for our listeners, why load balancing is so important in SAP systems and how these, ports factor into the equation?
Okay, so picture load balancing like a traffic management system for your SAP applications. You have like multiple application servers handling user requests, right?
Right.
Load balancing distributes these requests evenly across those servers. So, it prevents any single server from getting overloaded.
So it's all about keeping things running smoothly and avoiding those pesky bottlenecks.
Exactly.
But where do the ports come in?
Well, that's where the message server steps in. It acts like a director, guiding incoming connections to the appropriate application server.
So based on server load, availability, that kind of thing.
Yep, exactly.
The message server is like the air traffic control tower for our SAP system.
Perfect analogy.
Now, the video actually walks through a practical example of this process. Let's say I'm trying to connect to an ABIP system with load balancing. I enter the system ID and server address, which I guess helps determine the correct message server port. What happens then?
So then your computer actually consults the services file. It's basically a directory of SAP ports
Okay, like a roadmap.
to find that corresponding message server port.
Gotcha.
And to make things even clearer, the video actually uses Wireshark.
Oh, the network traffic sniffer.
Yep. So you can actually see the data packets being exchanged.
Oh, that's cool.
And it reveals like 3 key steps when you're logging on.
Right, let's break this down.
Okay, first, your computer establishes a connection with the message server on that designated port.
Okay, step 1, connect to the message server.
Then the message server responds. It tells your computer which application server dispatcher port to connect to.
So the message server is basically acting as a guide, pointing us in the right direction.
Precisely.
Okay, and finally,
Your computer establishes a connection with that specific dispatcher port, which, belongs to the application server that'll handle your request.
it's like a 3-step handshake. Connect to the message server, get directed to the right dispatcher, and then connect to the application server.
Pretty neat. So out of all these ports that are involved, it sounds like the message server and dispatcher ports are the absolute essentials for user access, right?
Absolute.
We've got to make sure those are open on the firewall.
Yeah.
And if we go back to that interactive SAP website, we'll see that those ports are clearly marked as external.
Yep, meaning they need to be accessible from outside the system.
So that website's not just a decoder ring, but also like a security checklist.
Exactly.
It's telling us, hey, these ports need to be open to let those users in. Now, let's shift gears a bit and dive a little deeper into the operating system level. How can we actually see which ports the ABAP system is listening on?
Well, there's this handy command line tool called KINS.
Okay.
It lets you view all the active network sockets on your system. So it's like peeking behind the curtain to see all those network connections in action.
Yep. And when you use the S command, you'll see all those essential ABAP ports we've been talking about.
Perfect. Let's walk through those essential ports one by one then. First up, the dispatcher port. We know it's crucial for user access, but how's its port number determined?
Usually, it's derived from the instance number of the application server. Each instance has a unique dispatcher port, which helps ensure those connections are routed correctly.
So each dispatcher port is like a unique address for a specific application server. Makes sense. What about the gateway port? What does that do in the grand scheme of things?
Well, that handles RFC communication,
RF
remote function calls.
Oh, right.
It allows different SAP systems or even external applications to communicate with each other.
So it's all about enabling different systems to talk to each other. And its port number, like the dispatcher port, is also calculated based on the instance number, right? Now, for added security, we've got the secure gateway, which I assume is the same as the regular gateway, but with encryption enabled for those RFC connections.
You got it. And naturally, its port number is calculated a little differently to, distinguish it from the regular gateway.
Okay, so we've got the dispatcher, gateway, and secure gateway, all handling different aspects of communication within the system or with external systems. What other essential ABA ports should we be aware of?
Oh, there's the ICM,
ICM.
the Internet Communication Manager.
What does that do?
It's like a central hub handling various protocols like HTTP, HTTPS, and SMTP.
SMTP.
For email communication.
Oh, right. So the ICM's a real multitasker.
Oh, yeah. But here's the thing. You can't always assume it'll be using the standard ports.
What do you mean?
Well, like, instead of port 80 for HTTP, you might find a system using, say, port 50,000 for HTTP and 50,001 for HTTPS.
Oh, interesting.
Even the standard SMTP port 25 might be inactive in some systems.
So it's important to check the system configuration for those ICM ports specifically. It's not always a one-size-fits-all situation.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered those essential ABA ports. Dispatcher, gateway, secure gateway, and the ICM. But I have a feeling there are a few less commonly used ports that might be lurking in the shadows.
Oh, you're right. There are a few.
All right, let's shed some light on those then. What are these other ABAP ports and what do they do?
Okay, so first you have the Start Services ports. They use both HTTP and HTTPS and are used by, well, the SAP Start Service.
So these are specifically for starting up SAP services.
Right.
Okay, what else?
Then there are the Message Server over HTTP and HTTPS ports.
What are those for?
There are alternative ways to access the message server, but they're typically only opened if they're specifically required for a particular setup or application.
So they're like backup route to the message server.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about the internal message server port?
That one's important. It's specifically for internal communication within the SAP system. You should never open this port externally.
Why not?
It's a huge security risk. Think of it like a secret backdoor to your SAP system.
Okay, a secret backdoor.
It should always stay locked from the outside world.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We can't compromise the security of our entire system just because, someone wants to take a shortcut.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about all these different ports and their roles and how they all fit together, but there's one more that I think deserves special attention, and that's the unqueue server port.
Oh, yes, the ENQ server port. This one caused a bit of head-scratching in the video.
Why is that?
Well, the InQueue server, or ENQ server, it manages locks within the SAP system.
So it makes sure only one process can access a shared resource or data at a time, preventing, conflicts and data corruption.
Right, like a traffic cop, making sure everyone follows the rules.
Exactly. But what makes its port so tricky to understand?
So at first, it looked like the ENQ server and the internal message server were sharing the same port number.
Which is not ideal.
Not ideal at all. It was 39, followed by the instance number.
But how can two services share the same port?
Well, they shouldn't. And that's where the confusion came in.
So how did they figure out what was going on?
So they used that SAX command to see what process was actually listening on that port. It was the message server.
Oh.
Not the ENQ server.
So the mystery deepened.
Right. So where was the ENQ server hiding?
Exactly.
The next clue came from the SAP documentation. Turns out the ENQ server port is determined by a parameter called Enkyo server port.
Okay, so they knew the name of the parameter, but they
Yeah.
still needed to find its value.
Exactly. They tried using the RZ1 transaction first.
No luck.
Nope.